Here's a thought experiment. It deals with the issue of hate and how it may be stigmatized subconsciously in our minds, and why it may be stigmatized. This is a response, kind of, to Ghost of Day in Person's video, which is a very interesting one called Hate the Emotion versus Hate the Stigma, or something like this. I'll just leave a link to it. Where she makes a fairly interesting case, or an interesting argument, not so much in favor of hate, but to sort of see beyond the usual taboo of hate is just bad, end of story, don't hate anybody ever. It's an interesting argument. And this is an issue that fascinates me no end. Hate. As I say, I tend to be attracted to the dark stuff in life or interested in it, so hate and anger are kind of the frustrated side of us, the fearful side of us, whatever, and how we come to terms with that. And I have an interesting thought experiment for this, to deal with this whole idea of the stigma or the fear response or the knee-jerk response that we have to hate. Let's imagine that, for the sake of argument, a company comes along and they can offer you trips back in time. Trips back in time, kind of like Total Recall, and you can actually change the circumstances a bit inside your own mind. Thought experiment, kind of silly really, but let's say that you decide that you're a history student or a history dilettante like me, and you want to go back, say, in time because you're fascinated, say, by the history of the 1930s, the rise of the Nazis or the fascists in general, and you want to meet Adolf Hitler just for pure interest's sake, for pure historical interest's sake. You want to meet him in a Vienna cafe before he was ever even remotely famous. And let's say that you could understand his thick Austrian German dialect, and you could perhaps speak it, just for the sake of the thought experiment. So in other words, you're a modern person, you know full well what Hitler is then going to go on to do. You've been transported back in time, and you're able to approach Hitler and talk to him person to person. And you're just interested in finding out what Hitler is made of, how he's thinking, what his plans are. You're coming at it from a scholarly point of view. You'd really like to see what is it that set this guy on the stage to doing what he did. He's kind of come down to us as sort of the epitome of how bad humans can get. So you find him in a cafe. You sit down. He's obviously a bum, so you buy him a cup of coffee so he can sit there and talk to you. Apparently he didn't drink coffee. He, I don't know, drank apple tea or something like this. Didn't drink alcohol or anything. So you buy him an apple tea. You buy him his tisane, and you sit there sipping your beer or your espresso or whatever in your Vienna coffee house. And you talk to him. And you ask him, what were your experiences like in the First World War? What are your frustrations dealing with your native Austria? What are your plans for the future? You know, you're a bum here. Your shoes are got holes in them. Your clothes are threadbare, etc. And you're going to become the dictator of Germany, are you? Yeah, sure, okay. Tell me how. But the thing is, you know in advance that he is actually going to do it, but you're interested in sort of putting him on the spot. You want to find out how this works. Leave aside the idea, of course, of killing him and saving the world, the horrors of the Holocaust or whatever. Let's just say you can't actually alter history. You can just go back and live in it for a bit. But there's some sort of weird safeguard in there to prevent the butterfly effect from screwing up human history like we see in so many science fiction short stories. So you go back and you talk to him. You just talk to Hitler knowing full well that the future is set, it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. You just want to know how Hitler's mind works. You sit there and you listen to him. Now, a lot of Germans who remember that period, I don't know how many of them are still alive now, but they would have told their kids and their grandkids, if they ever spoke about it, you weren't there. You don't know what power this guy's, mouth had over us. His ability to manipulate our hopes, our fears, our greeds, and our lusts, and our ambitions, and our subconscious arrogance, and all this kind of thing. He was unbelievably good at that. And so let's say, since we know this about Hitler, he had enormous black charisma, I guess you'd call it, kind of on the lines of, I don't know, Saruman from The Lord of the Rings or something like this. Beware Saruman's voice type thing. Now let's say you're sitting there and you're talking to Hitler in his Vienna coffee shop, and he's a nobody. But he's telling you all this stuff. You start to be charmed by him. You're aware of this. He's starting to sort of work on you a bit. Apparently he had this ability to sort of treat you or make you feel like you were the only person he was talking to. If he met you in a crowd, he would remember everything about you, all the details of your last even short conversation. And he, says something that he figures you would like to hear because he's read your personality, he's picked up little things in what you've said, and he starts talking to you enthusiastically about something that you're very passionate about. And, just the little ways in which a salesperson will sort of pull you in, get you roped in by what they're doing. And Hitler was a master at this. Now, you feel this. You feel his charisma. You feel his magnetism. You feel his spell. You feel that terrible attraction that so many German people felt in the 1920s and 30s. And the more it goes on, the more you become sort of, wow, I kind of like this guy. Now, this takes a bit of imagination because, of course, we have been taught from the get-go that you must hate Hitler or fear him or see him for what he is and see that he represents Auschwitz and all this kind of thing. Let's say this is the reason why I bring time travel back into this. Let's say you know the future. It's not a guess. You know that this guy is going to create the worst disaster of human history, perhaps. Worst genocide, worst horrible persecution, the most monstrous evils that have ever been visited upon humanity or that humanity has visited upon itself or whatever. You know this about him. Even in spite of this, his charisma is so powerful that you find yourself, at least in some ways, being caught up in it. Now, your little time of being able to sit there and talk, shoot the breeze with Hitler is past now. You're teleported back to the present. Nothing really happened other than you sat down and had an hour's conversation with Adolf Hitler in a Vienna coffee house in 1920 or something like this. The question arises, what do you do with that part of yourself that fell for Hitler in that conversation? What do you do with people who may fall under Hitler's spell in the same way that you almost did? How does it make you feel that something in you really almost wants to be seduced by someone Hitler-like? Would you call that the dark side, I guess, which we all seem to have. I'm not saying that this is an easy thought experiment for people to engage in, because again, it's so visceral, I think, our view towards the Nazis, that we even have Godwin's law to sort of remind us ourselves that we deliberately bring him up to sort of push things to an extreme. Let's say that a circumstance arises in which his position as just an extreme example of how evil things can possibly get is somehow suspended and things get blurred in your mind even for a short period of time. The line between good and evil, the line between Hitler just being plain Satan and maybe in a certain way, in a certain context, in a certain sense, you can actually say, wow, this guy's really on the ball. I'm impressed. You might even be Jewish if you went back, and this would be an even more fascinating thought experiment and an even more sort of improbable one and an even more devastating one, potentially. Let's say that your ancestors were wiped out in the Holocaust, or your parents, or you're an elderly person, and you sit down and you talk with this son of a bitch. even you feel some kind of weird admiration for him in some sense, even though it's all there with all the other horrible things. You're fully aware of the gas chambers, the genocide that took place in Russia against the Slavic people. You're aware of the selections that took place in, Auschwitz, Birkenau. You're aware of all the horrible things that the Nazis did to your own relatives. You may have grown up seeing some elderly person with a tattoo on his or her arm, forearm numbers, etc. Even then, some part of you at least gets it. Or perhaps doesn't even get it, but some part of you sees the dangerous, incredibly seductive nature of that kind of magnetism. That would make it even more interesting. Very sensitive subject, I know. But hate really is a sensitive subject, and Ghost of Day in Person has really fascinated me in this way with her video. And I'm trying to sort of see beyond hate as a stigma. I'm trying to see hate as a perfectly natural human response to certain circumstances. I would posit the view that if you went and engaged in this activity, you went back to Vienna in 1920 and spoke to Hitler, and for a period there, you understood the enormous charisma that he had, and you kind of, in a sense, part of you fell underneath it, or you allowed yourself to let your guard down a little bit, and then you came back, as it were, you came back to yourself. I think that a lot of people would be unbelievably alarmed by that experience. I think that they would be extremely shaken by it, to the proverbial depths of their being. My God, I let him hook me. Okay. How does that make you feel now about the subject of hate? Interesting thought experiment, eh?